Good morning. Today we'll look at chapters 5, 6, and 7 of Daniel. And chapters 5 and 6 continue with Daniel's life and experiences, and then chapter 7 starts a little bit of the look ahead to the future and different things that may or may not happen. And chapter 5 begins with King Belshazzar made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank in front of thousands. And Belshazzar hasn't been introduced before this. Nebuchadnezzar had been the king, had been, lost everything and then had regained yesterday. Belshazzar, tells us was Nebuchadnezzar's son. He drank and he tasted wine out of the silver that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had taken from the temple. And so this was, he was using the sacred vessels from the temple, from the Jewish temple, just for his normal everyday eating and drinking. And when they were doing this, as they brought in the golden vessels that had been taken from the temple, and he and his wife and his concubines drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. So they were, of course, they weren't worshiping God. And as they were eating and drinking and, dining, a finger comes in. It says, fingers of a human hand, fingers, not just a finger, but, the whole hand evidently appeared and wrote on the plaster of this wall, and they could all see. And the king saw this, and it says his color changed. His thoughts alarmed him, and his limbs gave way, and his knees knocked together. This was a very clear sign of something, but of what? Just all of a sudden, this, I think it would freak most of us out for something like that to happen. And the words that were written there, were, it was Mene, M-E-N-E, and then T-E-K-E-L, and P-A-R-S-I-N, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. But nobody knew what they meant. And verse 7 of chapter 5, the king called loudly to bring the enchanters, the Chaldeans, the astrologers, all the wise men, and it says, whoever reads this and shows me, I'll dress him up in fine gold chains, and the finest, I'll give him everything, just gonna, give him worthy praise. But nobody could figure it out. They had no idea what it meant. But then the queen, in verse 10, says, the queen said, O king, live forever. Let not your thoughts alarm you. There is a man in your kingdom who is the spirit of the holy gods. And so she's remembering Daniel. And she points Daniel out. His name, of course, is Belteshazzar. It's just this King Belshazzar, just as missing the T-E from Daniel's name, Belteshazzar, and so that was when I first read King Belshazzar. It just kind of made me, what? But so they called Daniel, and Daniel said, I don't need all of your gifts, you can keep those, but nevertheless, I will read them. And he goes on to this, speech about how, Nebuchadnezzar had been great. It says, whom he would, he killed, and whom he would, he kept alive, and whom he would, he raised up, so he could do whatever he wanted to, basically, as king. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened, his throne and glory was taken away. Just a reminder to this Belshazzar of the ills that fell upon his father when he kind of forgot, got too big for his own britches, we would say today. And verse 22, Daniel says to this king, and you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all this. Can you think about talking to the king and telling him, you screwed up, you saw all that happened to your father, and you did not, your heart is still hard against God. You haven't learned a thing. You lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven. The vessels of his house, you and your lords and your wives, you drank from them, you just messed up bad. And then verse 24, Daniel says, then from his presence, God's presence, the hand was sent, and this writing was here. And so then he interprets for the king. And this is another one of those, not a real good interpretation. I mean, Daniel had to give bad news to King Nebuchadnezzar, and now again, bad news to his son, King Belshazzar. The first, meaning, God has numbered the days of your kingdom, and it will be brought to an end. The tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. You are not a good person. You haven't lived up to what you need to be. You're not living and you're doing as a king should do. And then the final word, Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. So your kingdom is going to fall. And the word mene, or however you want to say those four letters, was written twice, that God has numbered your days. And, Daniel only gave one explanation for that. And then, of course, Belshazzar gave the command, and Daniel was all decked out and everything that way. But that very night, King Belshazzar died. And then verse 31, Darius the Mede received the kingdom. So just as you had read, that your kingdom is going to be divided between the Medes and the Persians, and so we know there's going to be more stuff happening. And so then chapter 6 deals a little bit with this King Darius. He sets things up and officials whom Daniel was one of. So that the king might not suffer loss. And Daniel became distinguished among all the others and found great prominent position. And of course, we know about the jealousies that come. And these others decide they need to do something about this Daniel. We got to do something. And so they get the king to say, about this worship time and stuff. The king, cast an ordinance that anybody that doesn't do just what you say will be cast into the lion's den. And there's just, they tricked the king into doing that. And Daniel knows that they've done that, but yet he goes to his house where the windows are open, and he gets down on his knees 3 times a day and prays to God. And these people are just watching just a little bit, They're snooping hard. They're trying to get some dirt on Daniel. I mean, this is, how common is that? You try to get dirt on somebody else. And we know the story. They catch him, Daniel is brought before the king, and the king reluctantly has to do what he said, and he puts Daniel in the lion's den. And he has a restless night where he doesn't sleep, but he wakes in the morning and he goes and he cries out for Daniel, and Daniel comes unharmed from the den of the lions. And the king is so pleased that Daniel is there and so upset with the others that he sets those in with the lions, and we know what happens. And chapter 6 ends with Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So we have the reign of, the Medes and the Persians here, just as the last word had indicated of what was written on the wall. And then we kind of backtrack now here, it's the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. This is, Daniel had this dream, he had the vision, and this is where we start getting into, the visions of end times, of the 4, he saw 4 great beasts and 4 great kings, and how the kingdoms and empires are gonna rise and fall, and rise and fall, and then verse 21, as I looked, the horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them until the Ancient of Days came, in verse 22, and judgment was given for the saints. And so we're starting now to see some of this eschatological stuff that Daniel and Revelation talk about, and again, there's a lot of different meanings, and there's a lot of different interpretations on all of this, and whether those 4 kingdoms have all come into being yet or not, who knows? Maybe one of those great kingdoms that were in Daniel's vision is still to come.